So, if you think about what makes the economy of minerals work, the problem I think for a long time is that we've thought about mining, right? And we think about our policy has not actually aligned to what we would call a mine to manufactured goods supply chain. I'll give you an example of semiconductors. Several years ago during the Biden administration, we passed a really good piece of legislation called the Chips and Sciences Act. And it allocated $280 billion to build a semiconductor industry. So manufacturing, workforce development, packaging, but not a dollar of it was allocated to the minerals that you need for semiconductors, which means that the germanium, the gallium, the palladium, the polysilicon, we actually remain almost entirely reliant on Russia and China for those. So if there was a disruption on the upstream minerals, which there was because China turned around shortly thereafter and cut us off of germanium and gallium, it didn't matter how much we invested into manufacturing the end good. It's not a geopolitical problem. It's an economic problem. It is how do we get projects online to stay online, to create long-term supply. And that economic problem requires bolstering both supply and demand hand in hand, right? Under Biden, we passed something called the Inflation Reduction Act. And a core part of that was that there was $7,500 tax credit that you received if the minerals in that EV came from the US or a country that we had a free trade agreement with. It was an imperfect piece of legislation for many reasons. One, there's only one free trade agreement country in Africa. It's Morocco, and they don't have a lot of minerals. Two is arguably you needed something more industry agnostic, right? Beyond EVs, you needed semiconductors, you needed defense equipment, right? Minerals for all of these sectors. But setting that aside, is what that sought to do was to give investors a confidence that there was a tax credit that was going to increase the demand for these goods and therefore encourage you to bring these mineral projects online. And that going hand in hand in a connected, integrated policy was important. And right now, globally, 2025 was a year of supply side policy. We haven't actually given a strong enough demand policy intervention.
I'm fascinated by the sort of argument that you've deployed, which is very convincing. But going back to the issue of the price floor, it seems to me that if you look at this from a market point of view, it makes obviously investment in these mines very questionable unless you've got significant long-term capital or government backing. I mean, can I just bring up an example, which is probably peripheral? I mean, I'm Cornish by origin, and around where I come from, there's a big initiative at the moment to reopen the famous South Crofty tin mine. Of course, the main British school of mining is in Camborne. You've got Cornish lithium now, which is a big deal investment. You've got the reopening of a big tungsten mine near Plymouth. But it seems to me that all of these projects, rather than being viable in themselves, are going to depend crucially on government subsidy to give them protection against fluctuations in the global price. But I mean, I'd love to hear, just taking that example, I mean, I'm sure in terms of overall production, maybe in Europe they're significant, but they certainly aren't beyond that.
It's a great question. So industrial policy is a complicated word, and it's actually been very icky, at least from an American perspective, to both Republicans and Democrats. But what is industrial policy? It is giving companies support when they are at a nascent stage until they grow to a point that they are economic. People don't always realize that Japan subsidized Honda for decades, and that Finland, I mean, I know we don't use Nokias anymore, but Finland also backed Nokia for many years. You're looking at a mining industry that's highly nascent, right? The world became reliant on China. I mean, we today in the US, we still import uranium from Russia. We never stopped after the invasion because it was really important to keep our lights on. But people don't realize that until the 1980s, we were the biggest uranium producer in the world and a net exporter. Till the 1990s, we were the biggest rare earth producer in the world. Right? We sent rare earths to the rest of the world. So in a lot of ways, we allowed in the West from, your roots, well, a lot of these mines closed. And so we are trying to get these mines back online. And that is going to require that early stage support until they can become economically viable. But now economically viable is two parts, right? One is maybe the subsidy to get started, right? Or the equity investment to get started. The second part of that, and what was really interesting about 2025, coming back to rare earths, is when Apple made an announcement that it was going to get its rare earths from Mountain Pass, that mine in California. General Motors announced where it was going to get its lithium and its rare earths from. And what that was doing is it was saying a demand signal. It was saying companies were willing to pay a premium. We can call it a security premium to source their minerals from a place that was not going to threaten their supply. Right? It became cheaper to pay more for that, but then actually have continued access to it. And that's where you're going to start to bolster demand through industrial policy. So, and then over time, what happens is as demand for that tin or that lithium or those rare earths go up and you're signing those offtake agreements, you actually don't need government support. Right. And so you can ramp down. And this is why government support so far today, whether it's Australia, or Japan or the US, it's time bound. Sometimes it's a 4-year agreement. Sometimes I haven't seen anything bigger than a 10-year agreement. Is saying we're going to provide that and we're going to have to provide that support because we do it for other industries all the time.
And